So first, I wanted to address why age diversity matters. Probably not a hard thing to convince you all of, but I thought I would go over just a couple of data points for you. The first is that we have some interesting demographic changes that have been occurring over the last 50 to 100 years. I love this slide because, or this graphic because it shows the change in a demographic chart that looks like a pyramid, which we're kind of used to thinking of a demographic chart. We have a lot of babies at the bottom of the chart. You know, we have, as you go up, there are fewer and fewer older folks. But there are two trends that are affecting this pyramid and turning it from a pyramid kind of into a pillar. And those two trends are a huge jump in the life expectancy in the United States. It did dip a little bit, obviously, last year. But in the main, globally and in the United States, lives are getting longer, lifespans are extending. The good health is extending farther into that lifespan. And so we're seeing, we're really witnessing the birth of a 100-year life. And so that's one big change affecting this pillar. The other is declining birth rates. This is not true globally consistently, although it is true in a lot of first world countries, and it's certainly true in the US. In 2018, the birth rate fell to its lowest point in 30 years. So we have fewer and fewer babies being born, and we have people living longer. So that's why the prediction, this is from the census, the United States Census, that in 2060 we'll have way more of a pillar than a pyramid. And what this means for the workforce is that the workforce, which is already generationally diverse, is likely to remain so. We have in 2035, again, this is from the census, I didn't put this graphic in, but in 2035, people 65 and older will outnumber children 18 and under in the US for the first time. So that's one of the first things I wanted to mention about why age diversity matters. It's because the labor force is age diverse. Another point that I want to make on this is that the skill landscape is shifting. It's shifting very quickly, as I'm sure you all feel every day in your work. And as automation begins to take over a lot of our job tasks, the types of skills and the types of skills that are needed that remain tend to be either hybrid skills or what we like to call uniquely human skills. I put this in from the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs 2020 report from last year, and it really struck me when I read this particular chart that of the top 15 skills that they predict will be in demand in 2025, we do not get to a technical skill until number 7 on the list. And if you take a look at the majority of the skills on this list, they are these hybrid or soft skills or human skills. So things like critical thinking, judgment, leadership, resilience, the ability to work together collaboratively. So these are all skills that tend to take time to develop. They're skills that tend to be passed in mentoring relationships or person to person or on the job experience. And so in this way, age diversity at work is a really valuable way to not only capture these kind of skills that older workers tend to have and tend to pass down, but it's a great way to bolster the skills of your younger workforce. So shifting skill sets are another reason why age diversity matters at work in general. And then the third point I want to make is that research has shown that mixed age teams specifically perform better than teams with less age diversity. Now, this is interesting because we know that diversity of any kind improves team performance, right? Because it tends to provide diversity of experience and perspective and those things too. But the theory around why age diversity specifically at the team level matters is the notion of knowledge spillover, right? So if you have a team that's a high-functioning team, so you've got an inclusive environment, a safe environment, everyone's working towards the same goals, you can have a situation where there's a lot of knowledge spillover. And when you have older workers, mid-career workers, younger workers, that knowledge sharing is invaluable. It's like, particularly for transmitting the knowledge from the older to the younger workforce, it's like getting a 2-for-1. You've got the actual contributions of the older workers, but you also have this passing of this knowledge down. And so this research actually comes out of Germany, out of the manufacturing industry in Germany, and I have the sources in the notes if you want to take a look at those sources. But this research showed that in companies that utilized mixed age teams, the productivity was higher, and the work outputs were better on creative tasks, judgment, problem-solving tasks. It didn't have an effect on sort of rote tasks, but it did on these sort of more complex tasks. So age diversity is good for team performance. Again, I think this is probably not news to you all. So now I would like to actually cover sort of the state of age diversity in the manufacturing industry. And this report that we've just put out on Tuesday that AJ mentioned really is I recommend it to you all. It's a great read, and it really dives into a lot of the detail. I'm just going to kind of cover out the top points. So in terms of the current workforce, I mentioned that there are 5 generations. The circle graph on the left is, I pulled that from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's from last year. It's a little difficult to sort of guesstimate the generations because they don't fall into neat 10 or 5-year increments, which is the way that BLS provides its data. But you can see that we do have a good amount of Gen Z already in the workforce, 11% of the whole US workforce. Millennials are the biggest group. They're at, I don't have my glasses, I can't see, I think it's 34%. But Gen X, me, don't forget Gen X, we do exist, the data proves it, is still 33% of the workforce, and a good amount too are boomers, 21% of the workforce. Still, a few of our traditionalists or greatest generation hanging on there, and that's invaluable as well. So as the traditionalists start to phase out, we're going to start to see Gen Alpha come in. That's my son's generation. So they're about 10 years away from joining the workforce. In terms of the manufacturing industry specifically, you can see that these percentages largely match up. This is, again, coming from the same probably data set, but different ways of estimating the generations. The manufacturing industry skews a little bit older than the general workforce. So almost 26% are baby boomers and silent generation. Gen X, 23%. So the mid-career is kind of a thinner layer for the manufacturing industry. A good amount of the millennials, though, 43.6%, and Gen Z is starting to come in as well. One of the things that's really interesting, another really interesting finding from this report, is that there's a lot of emphasis right now among the companies we surveyed on let's get some younger people in. We need to hold on to our older workers, and we need to bring in the younger generation. And you can sort of see that reflected in these percentages. But we also wanted to find out how the manufacturing industry feels about age diversity in general and mixed age teams. The great, I love, working with and talking to the manufacturing industry because it makes me feel good about what I do. It's harder when you're talking to the tech industry, right? But there's a very high valuing of all ages in the folks we surveyed. In terms of teams specifically, there are a great deal, 60% on average of companies value and are working with engaging their teams specifically around multi-generational. But about 10% are struggling with how to manage mixed age teams, and close to 30% aren't addressing it at all. So while there is a strong bias towards the value of age diversity, there's still some work to be done. There is a lot of awareness in the industry around, the aging of the workforce, the value of older workers, and yet the action that's being taken is not there as much. So only 14% of companies surveyed said that they've taken steps to recruit and retain older workers. So I think it's something that we all are aware of, we know about, we want to do something about, but we're sort of still trying to figure out the best way to address it. This report will help you definitely in that regard. We also wanted to know, okay, so you value the multi-generational workforce. How do you leverage that? What does that look like in your organizations on the factory floor? And we found, interestingly, and this is a little bit different from when we survey other industries, other employers in other industries, that the majority of manufacturing mixed age teams use is around promoting creativity and productivity. creativity and innovation. And I love that finding because, and there are a lot of, I've got some quotes I want to read as well, because we don't often hear that when we talk to other industries. They'll say things that tend to fall into very stereotypical assumptions. Well, our older workers are wise and our younger workers are fast, or whatever. And we use them for those reasons, or we value them for those reasons. But they don't usually associate mixed age teams or multi-generational teams with innovation and creativity. So I love that this is the top finding for us with the manufacturing industry. Again, there are lots of ways to leverage mixed age teams. You can see them here. But in general, there's definitely seems to be an acknowledgement. Again, it's more anecdotal than based on data that a mix of ages improves productivity, increases problem solving, and just helps overall with the bottom line. Okay, so in terms of trying to talk to looking for the bright spots or the where folks are actually paying attention to this and really doing something specific about it, we uncovered best practices in 4 key areas. And the first is to formalize policies, particularly around, phased retirement, offering that flexibility, and establishing a clear system of knowledge transfer. I'm going to cover that a little bit later. Expanding the recruitment pipeline is another key area for best practices. So really making a concerted effort to go after late and mid-career workers, to upskill the existing workforce. So you need to have kind of obviously an array of recruitment strategies. Emphasizing the value of age diversity is another area for best practices in terms of building age-inclusive organizations and managing mixed-age teams. You want to make sure that you include age in your diversity trainings. Consider issuing a public statement on the value of, multi-generational teams or age diversity at work. Making sure that you're really deliberate about honoring retirees' contributions. This has a strong effect on morale of younger workers as well as the folks who have retired, because the younger workers can see a path forward. They can see a way of staying with the organization, that this is a family that, is really valuing you from the beginning to the end. And lastly, doing research with your employees, doing those surveys, getting feedback on what their needs are. It's always good to survey rather than assume. So what benefits are of use to you? What kind of flexibility do you want? What sort of retirement options do you want? Do you want to phase in, or do you want to be hired back as a contractor on an as needed basis? Finding that out, talking to your employees across the life course is really important. So I wanted to dive into a couple of things in a little bit more detail that are listed in the best practices. And the first is knowledge transfer. So certainly when I talk to the manufacturing industry, but also the energy industry, I hear this a lot, that knowledge transfer is everything. How do you accomplish it? Because it's a big topic. It sounds good, but how do you actually go about it? And so there are usually thought of 3 different types of knowledge that you're trying to transfer. The first is the easiest. That's explicit knowledge, right? So in my example here, explicit knowledge is a recipe. Okay, so let's say a recipe for bread. That's the easiest to document and the easiest to transmit. The second is implicit knowledge, which is when you take that knowledge and apply it in a real world setting. So in this case, that would be like, measuring the flour, cracking the eggs, whatever. That's pretty easy to teach as well. The third type of knowledge is the hardest to teach. It's tacit knowledge. And in this example, it would be, okay, so you've made the dough. When do you stop kneading? That's experiential knowledge. It's harder to transmit. And that is the kind of knowledge that needs to be transferred in through programs like mentoring, through job sharing or job shadowing. And so that's probably the most valuable stuff that you have to transfer. I would also argue that there's a fourth type of knowledge transfer that needs to occur when people are considering retirement, and that is their networks, the relationships that they have, right? So let's say you're on the regulatory side of things and you have relationships with local regulators. If you have an ability to transition that person slowly into retirement and train their replacement, have them make sure that they create those introductions and help form those relationships before they leave, because a lot of times not every profession, but in a lot of professions, relationships are key to success. So I would actually argue that it's important to pay attention to that as well when you're looking at a knowledge transfer strategy. I found that when I was doing research on this a couple of years ago, I found this company called the Steve Troutman Company, which is a man called Steve Troutman. It's his company. And he came up with what I consider to be a really interesting way of identifying, being strategic about knowledge transfer. And you can see here, he proposes creating, mapping out the knowledge silos in your organization and sort of figuring out, okay, how deep is the bench? Do we only have one person who can do this, or do we have three? Is this person an expert, and are they sort of in danger of retiring, or are they sort of looking to retire? And so mapping out that, providing that grid of where the knowledge resides, how deep the bench is, and how critical or in some ways unique that skill set is to that person, you know where to focus your efforts. Also, framing the questions around the what, to get at the knowledge behind the process or the tool or the policy is really helpful. So, for example, what would happen if this process didn't go according to the documented process? Why is this person important to getting the work done? Asking those kinds of questions is a way of digging underneath and getting to that implicit and tacit knowledge that you want to transfer. And then, as I said, don't forget to factor in relationships both inside and outside the organization. Okay, upskilling and reskilling. This is it used to be future of work was the hot topic. This is now the hot topic among workforce development conversations. Again, this is from the World Economic Forum. This graph makes me kind of exhausted whenever I look at it because 50% of workers' jobs are going to be changing and require reskilling, and 40% are expected to have a significant shift in their job duties. So this means everybody, right? This isn't just folks on the cutting edge. This is me. This is you. Everyone is going to need to be continually reskilling. And so that's something that everyone's really wrestling with, governments and academic institutions and private enterprise. How are we going to accomplish this? Oops, I went backwards, sorry. I recently developed a presentation on age-inclusive approaches to upskilling and reskilling, and I sort of condensed it here just to one slide, but a couple of things to keep in mind. It's really important to adopt a growth mindset, when it comes to learning and development. You don't want to fall into old opinions that, young people learn really fast, they're eager to learn, older people are slow and they aren't interested in learning. Our research does not bear that out, and I'm sure your anecdotal personal experience doesn't bear that out. So make sure that you promote a growth mindset across your organizations. Promote opportunities for upskilling and reskilling across age groups. This is something, again, that it's easy to sort of fall back on assumptions and say, well, we've got this new training program. We really want to get our younger folks in it. We should do that, absolutely. But make sure you're deliberate about promoting these training opportunities to mid and late career workers as well. Provide training in a variety of formats. I have another slide on this that I found really interesting from a report of McKinsey. It's everybody has different learning styles, right? And that does not so much to do with age as it just is with different, different learning styles. So it's important to have a variety of formats. You can have asynchronous, you can have online, you can have in-person. You can do less formal things like I was saying with job shadowing and job sharing. It's important to accept different learning styles, right? So not everybody learns super fast. One of the things that's interesting to me about brain plasticity is that we have different peaks of intelligence at different times of life. And our fluid intelligence, which is our throughput, our memory recall, the speed with which we absorb and remember information, that peaks at 20. But that doesn't mean that our brains are done then, right? So other types of intelligence, emotional intelligence, peak later. And so accept that there are different learning speeds and different learning styles. And leverage your age diversity at work for informal soft skills training, right? That could be as formal as a mentoring program or as informal as just pairing up older and younger workers. I wanted to put this slide in here because I found this to be so interesting. This report is from McKinsey. It's pretty recent, and it's about upskilling at scale. So it's kind of talking about the upskilling issue. And they found that the more formats that companies provided different training opportunities in, the greater the success of that knowledge retention. In other words, their training strategies had better chance of success the more formats they provided. So, and again, all of these sources are in the notes section, so you can take a look at that later. Okay, and then last point I wanted to make here, sort of in a more deep dive, is I'm sure lots of you feel this way, like holding on to those older workers. Don't leave, please. Don't walk out the door. There's a big shift going on right now, a lot of upheaval. We have the Great Resignation in September of this year. More people resigned than in the last 20 years since the Bureau of Labor Statistics has been tracking it. At the same time, 3.2 million more baby boomers retired last year than they did in the third quarter of 2019. So there's a lot of people leaving and a lot of people looking for jobs. There's a huge upheaval right now, which is causing a lot of stress in the recruiting field. So we definitely know that there is, the pandemic made it sort of gave a lot of older workers a sort of push, like, what, I can bridge, I can make it the next 2 years without working. I'm going to go ahead and retire. And that's all that knowledge walking out the door. So there are a couple things you can do to retain your older workers flexibly. And in fact, to retain any worker flexibly, if there's caregiving challenges or if they're, I need to lean out to reskill. All of these types of retention strategies that work for holding on to older workers are good for holding on to any of your workers. So phased retirement is one of those, and that has a pretty long track record. We actually have that at AARP, so you can do it for as long as you want. You just have to have a formal plan with your manager. So that's one way. You can rehire folks back as contractors. I know that often happens in manufacturing and in the energy industry, because you have workers who have, they're ready to kind of like slow down and not be working 40 hours a week, and yet they want to still remain and be involved. And so, having them on a kind of as needed basis to come in and fill in on shifts or provide training in certain spots, it's really great to have that, have them there. Returnships, this is a great way specifically to get women back in the workforce who've taken a break for raising a family or for other caregiving. So that's always an option. It may not be so much for the factory floor, but you guys can tell me, I don't know, maybe that works there too. Pivoting, so job pivots to less demanding roles. That's what this particular article that I've captured here talks about. This man worked in he was in a spring manufacturing company, and he was on the floor, and he started to get, he was like, I really think this is getting a little bit too physically demanding. The company didn't want to lose him. So they said, okay, why don't you transition into the sort of the back office where the work orders are generated? And as soon as he got there, they gave him some training. He started immediately influencing the way that the folks that created the work orders did their job, because he knew the machinery so well. So pivoting jobs can be a really good way of retaining older workers. Offering time and place flexibility. Obviously, the pandemic taught us that we can do this. Mentoring programs, and then alumni engagement. This is something that is really important to remember. When your older workers or even your mid-career or early workers leave, if you have a way of staying in touch with them, if you have a way of bringing them back for company celebrations and highlighting their successes, that's a way to not only signal to your older workers or the folks who are leaving you value them and their contributions, but it shows your younger workers that, again, there's a place here for them, that they can stay, they could leave and come back even. So alumni engagement is a great way to provide that flexible retention. Lastly, I just want to talk about a couple of AARP resources. So one of the best practices that we cover in the report is making a public declaration. And this is the AARP Employer Pledge, which is the program that I run, is a way to do that. It's a pledge that states that you value older workers and are committed to building age-diverse organizations. And it's a pretty easy thing to commit to, right? It's just, an easy lift. And lastly, I'll just point out a couple of resources that we have. You can find them all at these different URLs, but probably the best one is aarp.org/employers. We have great stuff provided by my colleague on supporting the caregivers in your workforce, so strategies for how to do that. We've got the business case for workers 50 plus. We've got an age inclusion checklist, which we just launched a couple months ago. So a lot of great things here for you. And of course, we do have our manufacturing report, multi-generational teams report, which we just launched.